My involvement started 20 years ago. We purchased the farm from the former owner, obviously, and it already was involved in with the festival, and the maple syrup production was a part of the farm for historically 3 generations already. So it's not that I decided that that's what I want to do. It's just kind of by default happened to come my way. Our biggest thing is growing apples. The apples complement the maple syrup. There's 2 different seasons of work, and then obviously we do also the other livestock and crops farming as well. Myself, as being the owner, I'm involved in all aspects of the maple syrup production. From drilling the holes in like our operation with tubing, we put out the tubing in the winter already and get ready for the springtime. The freezing thawing in March starts a little bit earlier some years and ends a little bit later some years. But the range of what we call sap season is from 3 to 6 weeks. If we get 3 or 4 days of above freezing temperatures, the sap flow will stop just because it needs the freezing and thawing to keep it going. That is what it takes to make the sap flow. It's so weather related. So if it gets warm too quickly and stays warm, that obviously shortens the season very much. We need that fluctuating temperatures of plus 5 to -3 is a good range of weather. Also, more factors, rain and snow, and all of those play a part in this maple syrup season. As far as the collection, that's more automated now with the tubes. We still use some of the traditional methods just for more for show and tell, but it still gets done. We now employ the tubing and the vacuum system. It's made it possible to do more with less people. So when the sap starts flowing, it comes out of the tree through the spile into the tube, and the tube is connected to a network of tubing that collects the sap. It's all brought right to us. We don't have to go and get it anymore. And all the tubes run to a bigger collecting tank. The evaporator is quite large, and so we need enough sap to actually operate it. The tank is where we store the sap for a given number of hours until we're ready to start boiling. So this is the vacuum pump. It creates the draw for the sap to come into our storage tanks. Okay, so this whole thing here is called an evaporator. An evaporator has a few different parts to it. At the bottom where the fire is called the arch. That's where the heat gets generated. This part is called the pan part, and this part at the top here is called the preheater. The sap, once we have it collected from the trees in our storage tank, actually flows in through this pipe. And this is what feeds the evaporator with sap. This is also a continuous flow process. So we have the sap flowing in here into the preheater, where it gets preheated from the sap boiling down below. And the sap comes out here into this mechanism, which is called a float. What the float does is it regulates the depth in the pan, so that we always have the same depth, always have the same amount of sap in the pan, so that it never boils dry. So once we have the sap inside it starts boiling, it moves through a series of channels inside here, and all those channels do is keeps the sap and the maple syrup separated so that we don't have the whole thing mixed together with harshly boiled sap or maple syrup. To actually make maple syrup, it's a very temperature sensitive product. We boil the sap, and as we boil the sap, the water evaporates. As we evaporate the water, the temperature of the maple syrup rises because it's getting more sweet, more sugary. And then it is very critical to draw off the maple syrup at the right temperature setting. The temperature setting is 7 degrees above the boiling point of water, and that's very critical because that's what gives your maple syrup the optimum flavor and sweetness. So once we have the maple syrup finished, we think it's really close to being the right thickness, the right sugar content. We have this little thing called a hydrotherm that we use to test it to make sure it's the right thickness. When it floats level with the maple syrup, then we know that it's the right thickness. If it sinks too low or if it rides too high, then we know it's either too thick or too thin. So after the maple syrup is finished boiling, after it's reached the optimum temperature, we put it through a filter system, a filtration system to take out any particles of dirt or organic material. There's also minerals that I would say they crystallize or they turn to, it's actually what we call sugar sand. And we have to filter that out. It's just all natural occurrences, but it's stuff that we don't want in there. And then after we have that tested and it's right on, we use this, what we call a colorimeter. It tells us the different colors of maple syrup. So this is the lighter color, it's the golden. This is the amber color, and this one is the dark color. As the season progresses, it gets darker and darker. So I'll take my maple syrup and put it in this bottle, and then I set it in here to tell me what color it actually is. We just look through it, we hold it up to the light, and it tells us what color our maple syrup is. We boil it the same length of time, the sugar content is the same. The only big difference is the flavor, and that's because the darker has a stronger flavor. So now we've got the finished maple syrup in there. We'll move this over here. We'll put this in here to bring the maple syrup over into our bottler. And then we start pumping it in here, and this is where we do the bottling. The ratio of maple syrup to sap, it's traditionally been said that 40 liters of sap makes 1 liter of maple syrup, but it really depends on the sugar content of your sap. I have seen it as low as 25 liters of sap for 1 liter of maple syrup, which makes a big difference on the amount of wood it takes to boil the sap and the amount of time as well. put a bottle, a container, whatever size we want, we put it under here and we fill it from there.